those who were involved in making it come to life. Join us as we go behind the door.
Good evening, roomies, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Door with the Grey Rooms podcast. I am your host, Brooks Bigley, and with me tonight is Hailey Piper, the author of Season 4, Episode 16, entitled Small Handiwork. How are you this evening, Hailey?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad that you are here aboard as a new writer with us so that we can experience your story. Well, we've already experienced it, and now we get to talk to you about it. Hey, where are you located at, by the way?
I'm in Maryland, near D.C.
All of you East Coast writers. I feel so lonely out here on the West Coast. Nobody is ever like, oh, yeah, I'm from San Francisco.
We have a habit of it.
Is that a thing? Is that like writers like to congregate on the East Coast, or something about the East Coast makes you write?
I'm just joking. I have no idea. I'm from New York, though. I've known a bunch of writers from New York.
Okay. Well, that makes sense with what, like 11 million people or something out there? You would think a few thousand writers would become, big and make it and start spreading their names and stuff out there. How's the weather out there right now? Is it warm, hot, cold?
It's pretty stormy.
Like rain or snow or what?
Yeah.
I mean, we're going into May here.
Oh, yeah, you can never tell anymore. Yeah, it's been rain and thunder and such.
Okay, yeah, I always joke that's what makes a good writer. Nobody is like on the beach in the sun with a daiquiri writing out the best horror stories. You need that rain pounding on the window, and it's cold, and you got a blanket and your tea.
I don't know. I like jotting in a notebook by the beach on the rare occasion it can happen. I think the ocean is pretty scary.
Oh, I mean, that's actually a good point, staring at the giant abyss that is before you. Okay, no, I see how that works.
Especially because it looks so beautiful from the top.
Right, and it's hiding all those scary, horrible creatures and whatnot. Well, hey, speaking of creatures, your story, Small Handiwork, was such a gem of a story. It was so interesting to hear. You take what I originally went into thinking like, oh, I've heard about, gremlins before and whatnot, but as your story progressed, just kind of like the history that you intertwined into the story and the way that you kind of expanded on the mythos. Like, I went and actually did my own research after first hearing it, just about what gremlins were, and it's not just a horror movie that came out when we were all kids.
Right.
I was absolutely floored by what I learned about the history of gremlins itself and the Royal Air Force, and whatnot during World War II. So, this story didn't exist yet, and then you sat down and started to write it. What precipitated all of that?
I think it was because I wanted to. There were a couple reasons. One was. I think it was around Christmas time that year, so I did have Gremlins, like the movie, on the brain a little bit. But I kind of was like, what are some stories about them? Like, because, in the movie, I can't remember the actor's name, plays Mr. Futterman. He has a story about, like, they had gremlins in the, in World War II. And I was like, what are some of the actual stories? And I wasn't finding a ton. Like, it was kind of just this thing that got passed around a bit, but it was, and I was trying to figure out where did that come from? Where did the people in World War II get this idea? And it really seemed to spawn from there. It was kind of like a at the time, modern take on fairies, messing with your stuff. Just kind of almost like it was just a curse word to use. It's like, devils or whatever. That there was, but it was not a common thing, but it was regular enough that it was happening. And I kind of I wanted to explore that. Like what some pilots might have felt about it, they might have experienced. One of the fun things was having the engineer in the story kind of like speculate on where gremlins might have come from. Just as a matter of like, hey, it's not like humans have been flying for that long, even at the time. And And then just kind of, tying that in with the characters, like the captain's personal issues and such. Originally, there was an ending, like an epilogue, but I kind of cut that off because it didn't work. I felt everything worked better, ending the way it did. But because, and that was based on something, it essentially was that his plane had crashed into the munitions plant he was supposed to bomb.
Oh.
And that reports had come from people who witnessed it, who didn't die in the explosion, that they thought they saw little men floating up into the clouds.
That's almost like a happy ending in a perverse way.
In a perverse way. I wrote it, I had jotted the notes to be creepy, but it was kind of just this weird, people being shell shocked over having been near this munitions plant when it exploded. But I feel like I remember reading something like that where people had seen a fire and thought they saw these little men floating up from it. But I don't remember where I read that, and that could just be Mandela effect in my brain, because I wrote this quite some time ago, so I don't. The research is a little further from my brain currently than the story itself is. But yeah, it was just I really wanted to have a story that was more in line with where this stuff was coming from. As far as I can tell, Gremlins seem to originate at that time period. So I just wanted to explore that, because that's interesting, because how much folklore really originates in the 20th century.
And that's what I wanted to get into, is that this was a perfect example of that, of the origins of it. And from when I was reading it also, there were scant ideas of it that started to form in the 20s, after the world was reeling from the First World War,
right.
but that was more tanks and infantrymen during that war. So this, like you said, the flying was very new to humans, especially in wartime.
Right.
And I felt like what the takeaway I was getting after reading all this new stuff I never knew before about Gremlins was that it was really important, this lore, this mythos of Gremlins. It was really important to the Royal Air Force, just because it actually helped with the morale of the pilots. Because it would be one thing to, again, you have this brand new technology of planes in the sky, and even
right.
I love the bare bones of how you just have a single mechanic just out there kind of just fixing stuff. It wasn't like this massive, building full of scientists and whatnot, technological crew and maintenance people putting everything together, making sure the best of the best planes were getting out there. You just the mechanic, talks about, back in my day, the nails and tape were holding together the planes. So of course, naturally, things here and there are going to fall apart or break, and it sucks. That's just yet another terrible thing happening to you while you're in wartime. And so
right.
to be able to not blame your fellow pilots or your crew members, but to well, there's these little things, and this is just another thing that we've got to watch out for. It kind of created almost like maybe an extra fuel that gave them energy to continue their fight, that it took away some of that misery, and it gave them something else to channel their feelings
right.
and thoughts onto. That was very important, I think, to bring, by, I guess, having the mechanic explain what he thought the mythos was of the Gremlins, instead of you just making it this is about scary creatures that just attack people's planes at night. It was so cool to have everything else wrapped up into it. Did you have to do research? I mean, I felt like I was on a base with our main character, John, just in the little subtle nuances of how you wrote it.
For the Gremlins, where the engineer is speculating where the Gremlins come from, that was kind of just something I thought of, because I was just, one of my kind of pillars of when I write stuff is empathy. And I was like, well, I don't think that these things would just purposely spawn into existence solely to break planes. So it's kind of okay, where would they come from? Why would they do it? And it's just they're bored. That made the most sense to me, honestly. It's just like he says, there's not much to do in the sky. For the on the ground stuff, I did. It wasn't a ton of research. It was kind of just finding finding an air base that I felt made sense. I wanted to get an American pilot in there. Just researching which planes had which circumstances, what years these would make sense, like just a lot of coordination stuff. But yeah, in the process of it, and of course, when you're doing research, you find out a bunch more stuff than you actually need. And you end up you write it into the story and then you end up cutting a bunch of it because it's just like, this is just details that aren't necessary for the narrative. I had a bunch of other plane stuff and comparisons, and it's just like none of this, we don't need any of this. But just trying to figure out the things that would be the most reasonable, which is funny because today I don't worry so much about that as much. A book I have coming out next year takes place in the 1880s, in New Mexico, and most of my research was just about what things are called on horses and what weapons we most likely use. But I didn't really worry about location reasonability or a bunch of other stuff like that, like I did with this story, because I was just like, readers just don't need all that. Readers don't care.
Right. Right.
But in this case, this was a bit earlier when I wrote this story, and it was just like, I want to try to nail this. I want to try to understand this well, especially because the gremlin stuff is so scant that that we have, and I wanted to ground everything else really as much as I could.
Right. Yeah, and it was specific to this time, which was during World War II. It was specific to the Royal Air Force, as the lore of the gremlins started to take shape, and even so much as being used in public safety posters and whatnot, and safety posters of the gremlins want to poke your eyes out, make sure to wear eye coverings. I uncovered all of this stuff. I don't want to say propaganda because there was nothing they were propagandizing, but just using it kind of as a funny and clever way to get people in the spirit of it was wartime, and so there was there was a lot going on, and this just kind of added not a fun element because war is not fun. But it definitely added an element, I think, to it all that allowed us to be a little bit more fantastical about it, so that as humans, well, I say we, but you and I didn't expect, but they could just better deal with what was happening around them.
Well, I mean, having something to be superstitious about gives you a sense of control and considering how chaotic wartime is, right. You need every little bit you can get.
And then even a bit about, it is just my own inference of how, based on kind of how you describe their interactions, that, what was his name? Harvey was the mechanic.
Yeah.
He seemed very religious, whereas John was not. And there was moments where it seemed like Harvey was afraid to touch the plane. Oh, your plane got bit by the gremlins, and he was afraid to touch the plane, as though he would somehow transfer that to the next plane that he worked on. So he very much believed in that superstition of them being, demons or devils. And I thought that was a clever, I don't know if you did that on purpose, but I thought it was a very clever add-on that just fleshed out that story more. And it went very well with what the hell was happening, in terms of real World War II and the idea of gremlins.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's one of those things where it's if you can be well, as long as I don't touch, I'm good. It's just a matter of control. He had no idea where they were coming from any more than John did. But, we kind of sometimes it's just easier if we can just make up some rules for ourselves just to make it seem like, it's easier.
Yeah, that's what kids do all the time.
Right. I mean, it's most superstitions. It's just it's kind of okay, well, as long as I don't do X, Y, Z, I won't have bad luck.
Exactly. I remember as a kid, if I was afraid of, a certain door I had to walk past at night, down the hallway to get to my bedroom. And,
Right.
the idea was like, well, if I run my right hand along the wall, I'll be fine. Or if I walked backward, I didn't really walk backwards, but
Right. Same as if I stay under the covers, the monster won't get me. I mean, when I was little, we had the light switch for our basement was at the bottom of the stairs, which
oh
sucked.
God.
And my rule essentially, like I don't even remember inventing it, just came into my head. It's like if I hold my breath going up the stairs, then they won't get me, whatever they were.
I was just thinking that in my head as you said it. It was very synchronistic. I was like, I bet you she held her breath. It's such a that's such a kid thing to do. Like, it's so arbitrary, but to a child, you're like, well, this will work. I'll pat my head as I go through, and they won't see me.
Right. We have when you're a kid, especially, you have so few things that you get to decide. Like, it's one of those little things like, okay, if I touch this wall, if I hold my breath, if I, whatever, if I don't blink for 10 seconds or the count of 10, just all these little things that are just saying like, okay, well, I stopped, I did something. I protected myself.
Right. And as you said, the bed blankets, absolutely impenetrable, made of steel. The second you covered your head with it, nothing could get you.
Exactly.
I slept with my nose to the wall when I was a kid, and that was also my form of protection. I have no idea how that worked in hindsight as an adult, but as a kid, I was like, oh, I'm fine. My nose is to the wall. I am protected.
It's kid logic. It doesn't have to make sense to adults.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then as adult logic, here we are, adult men and women being like, well, the reason why the plane's falling apart is because little gremlin things are doing it. So people had to buy into that. And again, that's why it was so important, I think, during that time as humans were figuring out just what the hell, was going on and stuff.
And I think I addressed this in the story. It's safer to imagine that than to think that there were Axis agents on base.
Yeah. That was another thing that John had said. Like, if there's the enemy is here, I need to alert the base.
Right.
Which is almost crazy. Like, you really think like a single guy is just walking around inside the hangar, like destroying your plane, like pulling your gas out.
Could be if they were dressed as an engineer.
Ah, that's true. Yeah. Okay.
But I don't think they'd be chewing on the gas on the fuel pipe like he or fuel hose like he found. But you never know.
Yeah, that's true. And then again, like, I'm sure that there really were things where like an improperly placed hose had some kind of gouge marks on it from some kind of other interference of a part in the plane. And so that just helped build that lore. Like, no, look at this, John. This is actually the teeth mark of something. So, it wasn't just per se men just wildly making things up.
Right.
And then on top of that, you also touched on like maybe that one guy was hallucinating because his engine had stalled and was smoking inside the cabin, and just the effects on the human brain, that we didn't understand at the time with the fighter pilots, 30,000 feet up in the air, or however, I just threw out a number, however many feet up in the air.
No, I don't. Yeah, that part I didn't really know how high they flew.
Yeah. But still, that could cause hallucinations. That could for sure make people think that they were seeing the things that they wanted to see to explain the thing that they couldn't. You had all kinds of fun themes.
I'm sure like people who are listening to the story would be like, were there actually gremlins in John's plane, or was he like losing it because of, stress or, his anxiety about his mission, or the anxiety he's had since he was a kid?
Oh, right. Yeah. That his mom was trying to also explain away as something else.
Right. He was trying to explain it and just made it worse because parents totally do that.
Right, yeah. Like how he lost the cross inside the cockpit, like that could have been he started to stress out, I gotta find that. And then that was making him feel that he thought there were gremlins crawling through his jacket.
Right. I mean, to me, there were gremlins in his cockpit because I prefer to read my stories that way. It's already not real. We don't have to make it like not real within the not real.
Well, and that's what speculative fiction is, though. Speculative fiction is more of the ambiguity behind it.
Right. And it's just like, right. Somebody could read it that way. But for me, I prefer if it's already fictional. So I'd rather have like the things within the fiction be real to the fiction. Like, I don't like that. I don't like this. Like, they were just out of their minds. There were no monsters. And it's like, well, there already aren't monsters. Come on, throw me a bone here.
Yeah, that's also a cheap ticket out of the story. Like, oh, surprise, it was all a hallucination and she's just laying in bed the whole time. That's a cheap ending.
Right, right. It's just, and I know a lot of people think that's clever, but it's like, it's really not that far removed from it was all a dream. And we know that's not clever. So,
Yeah. It's to make you go, oh, damn, I wonder if it was. That's the clue, I think, for a great ending.
That's true. It was like, that's one of those things people talked about with Inception. It's like the ending was such a cliche kind of like, like it was all a dream, or was it, but actually like made it work. And so it's all in the execution.
Yeah. Well, you execute it beautifully. I mean, my own opinion, it's probably better that you did leave the epilogue out, just because that almost kind of did make it like, yep, they were definitely little gray dudes, brought his plane down. Everybody saw them at the end. I don't know, not that would have cheapened the story, but for sure would have gotten rid of the ambiguity, which makes it exciting and scary, I think. I've always said that it's exciting when you don't know what it is.
I mean, honestly, the way it's been adapted, that epilogue definitely wouldn't have worked. And I prefer the way, because like, I sent the Grey Rooms a very different way this story was told. And I really like the way it's adapted to be John's narration.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, and like even taking some of the stuff that was narration and turning into dialogue was really clever. Like I really liked how this all turned out.
Yeah, the secret is out of the bag. I have said that in a couple other Behind the Doors recently, that we will always, you give us a story and we're going to produce your story, but we do kind of take tiny liberties where, like in your case where it was, more prose, that we want. We want to convert this into an audio drama feel that you're the fly on the wall hearing it.
And honestly, when I was listening to the first story in the episode, I was like, oh no, mine's going to be so dry compared to this. But then I listened and you guys had all adapted it, like, and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Like I'm not going to pretend I'm a script writer. I know I'm not a script writer. So I'm just like, I'm a prose writer. I love my prose. Like I love prose more than I love dialogue. But it's just like, so I was just like, this, is fantastic.
Yeah. And we don't want people thinking that if they're going to submit to the Grey Rooms that we're just going to bastardize the story. I mean, it's got to come out how you're familiar with.
Right. No, that was the thing. It's like every sentence I wrote was given its due. It just was a matter of whether it was John narrating to himself instead of like a third person narrator, or whether it became dialogue that he said to another character. But like every line was still in there in some capacity. Like it was very true adaptation. I was telling my wife that I was like, the story is like there. Every beat of the story is there. So like the pacing is not hurt at all. It flows all well. And my writing is still in there. It's just been tweaked a bit to make it work with this. And it was like, I was telling us like, none of my dialogue was changed. All my favorite lines are like, all the lines are there. All that stuff's there. It's just the stuff is just kind of moved a little bit. And it's like, so no, I would not caution anybody who's wanting to submit to the Grey Rooms definitely should, because their stuff is going to be treated right.
Thank you. Yeah, we really only do things like change the perspective of a character, or we might feel that a female-led character would be stronger than a male. So depending on how far we go into it, we will even ask the author like, oh, we're going to change your male lead into a female lead. Is that okay? Yeah,
that kind of thing I think you would have to ask first, but this was just again, it was taking what was third person prose narration and making it the first person character, and nothing was hurt by it at all, because it's not like it was at ever any point in the version I wrote outside of John's point of view, so it didn't need to be that way anyway.
Yeah, and that's really the only common thing that we do, is that change that third person perspective into first person.
No, so. It worked beautifully.
Excellent. And your writing itself is very eloquent. I loved just the little ways that you even like how Harvey spoke. And like the one particular line that John said, I really loved, where, he's doing the Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And then he's like, well, hadn't the meaning of earth and heaven brought these demons in the first place? And I was like, whoa, that really hit. That like spoke to me. Like that's such just a beautiful way to ponder something, like this is why we're in this mess in the first place. So, it was done very well. And I thought it was interesting that you didn't you didn't have the gremlins say much. They weren't like discussing anything to John, but they were showing signs of communications. You know, there was that one where they're like, the demons lie. And then it was really beautiful, the ending of them, you know, basically etching into the window, like, yes, you know, come join our kingdom, John. Like, that was, again, it was one of those like, oh shit kind of reactions from me, you know, as that happened. I mean, God, John must have just been scared out of his goddamn mind, you know, leading up to the end there.
Yeah, and so I feel it's important, especially when you have a doomed character, that you know, as the writer, you feel sorry for them a bit. I've read stories where it's very clear the character is just a toy for the author to like throw into bad things, and like I never feel anything from those. And like one of my things with writing is just I want lots of emotion, both to feel it and to put it into it. And I mean, I end up feeling sorry for most of my characters, even the bad guys, a lot of the time, because just nobody really gets out of a lot of this stuff very happy. They just, you know, sometimes just survive. But yeah, I feel it's important that you can really, you know, feel where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's paramount in horror, especially, that the one thing that you're toying with is not just scaring the audience, whether they're listening or watching, but you're scaring the main character itself. So by proxy, we're scared of what they're going through.
Right, because otherwise it's just a haunted house, like a Halloween haunted house where you're going from door to door and somebody's jumping out yelling boo every section. Or you're just kind of in a situation where, you know, you're, I don't know, the kid from Toy Story with a magnifying glass.
Right, yeah. And there's no real point to what's happening. It's
right.
I remember being part of in the earlier days of like communities joining on the internet, and I was a part of a horror community when horror audio dramas were, you know, just coming out. And so everybody was always excited of like, well, I want to write my own horror story. And then they would share it with the community. And like the very common thing that everyone would do would just try to come up with something scary visually. They thought of like, there's this guy and he's just chopping this person up on a table. And like, it didn't go anywhere or do anything, because what in the hell are you afraid of there? Like, you're afraid of the very initial scene, and then what? You're not going to be like, oh, now I'm even more scared he's cutting the arm off. Oh God, now I'm even more petrified. Like, there's nothing sustaining there, and you're not afraid of it because this is never going to most likely happen to you. It's always good to be afraid of something that could happen to you.
Well, I write stories with monsters and stuff, and that's never going to happen to you. So I don't know about that, but I would definitely say you do have to draw people in enough to believe it. You know, beyond the surface level of just the immediate pain or threat.
Right, to continue that fear, basically.
There was I can't remember the name of it, the title of it, but there was a story, I think it was on Pseudopod a couple years ago, where essentially, if you zoomed out from it, it pretty much just was a guy chopping up a guy who's alive on a table. But it was told from the point of view of an alien who didn't understand human biology and had abducted a human, and that was the person on the table, and essentially was trying to fix them and trying to inject different things into them, trying to help them essentially, because like this creature is missing this and this, like these things that would be natural to an animal on the aliens world, and is just getting more frustrated as the person's life signs are going down, their pain is increasing, and eventually they die, and just like, I couldn't help this one. And like
that would get to me. Yeah.
Right. And see, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it's the unexpected. What is going to happen next?
It's that, and it's also just the idea like that this you know, person is essentially slowly torturing this other person to the point of death, and is going to do it again because they think like, I'm just not good enough at healing these things. I just can't help enough. And there's just something crucially messed up with that, especially if you're somebody with anxiety who's just like, does try to help people and worries that you're making it worse. Like there's just a lot of layers there. So it's like, you can do that story of somebody just chopping somebody up on a table, but you got to go beyond just the initial shock of it.
Right. Because you're just expecting, well, now they're going to cut a finger off. Now they're going to cut a foot off. Yeah,
Right.
there's nothing to fear there, but the unexpectedness of, oh, what calamity is this alien going to visit upon this person? That's terrifying. Oh, that would for sure get me. I'll have to go back and search that story. It sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I can't remember. I wish for that author I could just be like, it was this story by this person. And it's like, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm sure some Google sleuthing will find it. No worries. So then, as a writer, I take it you do write other stories, other horror stories.
Yeah, this will be my 81st published short story.
Well, look at you. So what is your style then? How do you go about, like, what do you feel about horror?
Well, I feel horror is the most honest genre. I think that's both in expression of the author, as far as, like, if you are showing your honesty, you're going to get the best horror, but also in that characters, I think, show who they are when they're afraid. And I think when you're working with that, like, it lends to a different type of story than a lot of others. And not that fear is the only thing, because I also think that horror is a genre of empathy. I think it has open room for catharsis, a sense of triumph sometimes, a sense of control, like we were talking about with superstition stuff, because people who don't engage with horror will be like, well, why do you read that stuff or watch that stuff when there's so much horror in real life anyway? And it's like, because this is horror that you can shut off if it gets to be too much. You can close the book. You can't do that with real life, except when you read the fictional horror, then you can kind of escape it for a little bit. But really, this is the horror that you can control. You can decide whether it's too much. And so you get to indulge a little bit in it too. Whether that's just in the sense of, like, I'm identifying with these people trying to escape this terrible thing, or I might be identifying with this person doing this terrible thing, maybe for a bad reason, maybe for a good reason.
Yeah, and that's just as, like, the listener, reader, watcher interacting with it. And then as a writer, I feel like it's so amazing that you get to use it as a vehicle to share, your personal beliefs in things, concepts of foreign things that people might not understand. I've said it before that you might not understand what true love is. And so there's a plain old story about true love is meaningless to you, and you probably won't read it. But if you tell a horror story that might have true love in it, not that that's the best way to learn about true love,
yeah.
but you for sure can be like, well, I'm interested. Tell me more about love as I'm learning, through this horror lens. And so it's a great vehicle to deliver new concepts to people.
Totally. I think horror is one of those genres where you can really tell any kind of story. It can mix with any other genre without losing itself. And yeah, like you were saying, you can get any kind of feeling across with stuff. Like a couple of my books, like The Worm and His Kings and Queen of Teeth, I've said to people before, it's like, if people had just left these women alone, nothing bad would have happened to all these other people. It's sometimes not always a monster out trying to stop, trying to mess people's lives up. Sometimes just somebody just wants to be, treated right and left be.
Right. Yeah. Well, what are, like, the ultimate themes through your stories? Do you find similar scenarios? Do you find similar antagonists versus protagonists? What ultimately are you as a writer?
Well, I try to make sure there's empathy and emotion in whatever I'm doing. I want to be able to look at things from any character's point of view, even if they're terrible. I want things to be imaginative, and I try to, be accessible to, like, having queerness. Like, I'm a queer woman, and one of my things on, like, people see on my social media is make horror gay as fuck. Most of my stories have, queer characters in them. Not this one, but not the one that's on the gray rooms, but just it tends to just happen. I do see, now that you've asking that with antagonists and stuff, like, I think, people who have power over other people tend to be, something that I notice and end up writing. Themes are all over the place because, like, when you're writing short fiction, you're going to approach, like, a million different things. So it's all over the place. Themes of like gender and sexuality, themes of regret, trauma, um, guilt. Yeah, I try to get deep into what I'm working with, just because I do want to explore the emotional elements of it. And I do want to express those emotional elements. When somebody's told me one of my stories makes them cry, I say I'm sorry, but I'm actually not, because
You're like,
that
mission
means
success.
right. I like when a story can make me cry. I mean, like, I like being able to have gotten so emotionally connected with it that it happened, and I want to be able to do that for other people too.
Well, and it seems like you're more interested in humans overcoming other humans versus the monsters in the closet, the monsters in the woods. That's what I'm inferring, if I'm wrong.
Uh, not sure. I mean, I like to have creatures in all my stuff. Like, that's a typical thing for me. But a lot of times, it's not as simple as just like they're a bad thing out there to get you. Like, it often is like a very human type of monster, whether it's an actual human or just has the kind of, vindictive qualities you don't really want to meet in a person. Sometimes it's like my novellas, Benny Rose the Cannibal King and The Worm and His Kings. It's humans using creatures or monsters. They're kind of the power behind that, because it lets them get what they want, and because I think just that we have this unfortunate situation where people just exploit what they can, whether the thing itself is actually even aggressive or violent in its own, if left alone.
Yeah, that's important. And so it sounds like to me that like you're good at the human versus human aspect, or like the human using something like monsters or whatnot against the humans. In the case of the story that you did for the Grey Rooms, this was just humans versus monsters, basically. There was no evil protagonist, or excuse me, no evil antagonist.
I think this one was probably a little simpler than I usually do, but I really wanted to explore the the emotions of John, as opposed to, I mean, and that's one of those things. It's World War II. I mean, not to simplify things, but it was pretty cut and dry what was going on there. It's not like a lot of situations where it's like morally gray.
Yes, absolutely. Well, have you done other stories that have been turned into audio dramas before? Do you work with podcasts, or is this a first?
Yeah, let's see. I've had a couple stories on Monsters Out of the Closet, which I think they completed. Like, I think that show has ended. I had a story on Pseudopod last December. Let's see, the Poe Letters from Poe, I think it was called, was another podcast. And and I've had a couple on Tales to Terrify.
Okay. And no, those are more, I recognize Tales to Terrify and Pseudopod. So those are kind of more guys sitting in a chair reading the story out loud type scenario.
Yeah. No, dramas. Yeah, Monsters Out of the Closet, those were more audio dramas. But that would probably be the only show where that was happening, where they had different actors for the different characters. And like, sound effects and music and stuff.
Yeah, it's such a fun medium to do.
It is
I hope that you're encouraged
definitely
more now to maybe write for, more horror audio drama podcasts.
No, I really enjoy listening to how those go about. I think like definitely one of my stories, Autonomy, and this one both have in common is that really just amazing sound design. Because I had another one with them, Scarlet Hide Molly, and it was basically like people sitting around a campfire telling stories within the story. So there wasn't a lot for them to work with sound wise, but like Autonomy and Small Handiwork both had a lot going on, like, foreground action, I would say. So it's really neat to see this, to listen to this whole like atmosphere happen. Like in this one, for example, like once John is up in the air, the plane engine and the wind and the dog fights happening around him as he's trying to get to this air base, like just, it's really interesting to listen to and really exciting.
Yeah, it's hard to include that like in a straight narration, or especially if you're just reading a book. You could write out that, I suppose.
I mean, the hope is when you're reading a book is that that's happening inside your head. Like the hope is that when you're writing it, when you're writing it, you're helping to incite these sensations, into the reader.
Yeah, your character might just be opining about what he's seeing around him in his plane, hearing the sounds and this and that, for sure.
Well, I mean, when you do the prose of it, like, it's kind of, because I don't write first person that much. So like that was another neat thing with this, was hearing this getting turned into first person was really neat. But yeah, it's just kind of like, because you can't think of it like, I mean, at least for me, I know some writers do this. For me, I don't really have it in my head like, like you're watching a movie. I try to kind of have it in my head as if you're, been like quantum leaped into the character. And so you, instead of like them kind of pontificating about it, you're kind of feeling directly what they're feeling.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a great way to, like you said, I like you say quantum leap. You just get right into the action of the story. You don't have to set it up with a bunch of words describing the setting and the scene and the character first.
I mean, yeah, because we're limited in what we can sense anyway, I think. So trying to work with that's one of those things. It's just like with writing something, we get to work on feelings, like actual like touch that like a movie can't do that.
And that's why I always prefer reading over movies anyways. Like I love a good horror show or a horror movie, but it's the book that will get me. And it will be the book that I want to read first before seeing the big screen adaptation.
Right. No, same. I mean, I like movies, but it's just like I know I can't argue that. It's like, yeah, I read more books than I watch movies in a year.
There you go. Yeah, books are magical, and like physical books too. Like I have what is it? I don't even remember what it's called. A Kindle. I was going to call it an e-Kindle. I have a Kindle. Shows you how often I use it, and there's just something dead to me about it. It's like, oh, I can have 1,000 books on here. Okay, whatever. It's just not the same as holding that book and turning the pages and sticking your bookmark in there and then carrying it around with you. Like, I love that. I was always at the library, as a kid. Now growing up with two daughters, I'm taking them. We were just there yesterday after school. We're always at the library. So books are so important.
Yeah, like when I'm traveling, I appreciate my Kindle. But like when I'm at home, it's like, yeah, probably the Kindle. The Kindle's there if I need it. But I do like to have the books.
There you go. Absolutely. So, hey, as we draw to a close here, can you share with people your social medias, where we can find you, where we can find your works, so people can, find all these 81 stories that you've compiled?
Sure. I'm at www.haileypiper.com. And then my Twitter is at Hailey Piper Says. And then my Instagram is at Hailey Piper Fights. And
you can find everything you've ever written on your website, or?
You can find links to anthologies and podcasts and such. Some things are, some of the older stuff might be out of print. I haven't checked in a while. Should probably do that. And then, and links to books and stuff are there. And then I should probably mention I have a book coming out on May 7th, huh?
Yeah, tell us.
It's Your Mind is a Terrible Thing from Off Limits Press, and it's a space horror novella.
Ooh, we've done space horror on this show before, so that'll be intriguing.
Oh, cool.
And where is it available at?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, hopefully, I think some independent bookstores, and hopefully on bookshop.org soon. It's in paperback, Kindle, and I think the audiobook will be coming out either the end of May or early June, or probably spread across, because all the different sites get audiobooks they get them at different times. Like Audible will get it one day, and then Libro will get it 5 days later, and then over whatever the library system is called, we'll get it like 10 days after that. So it'll probably be scattered everywhere, but yeah.
Well, it was great of you for joining us tonight, Hailey. I appreciate you taking the time to sit and chat, and I thank you for sharing your world with us here in the Grey Rooms.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I hope that maybe you will write some stuff for us for another season. I always find it funny, and it really does make sense to me now, but I will always be like, you were, like I'll say, you were such a great writer. I hope that you'll contribute to our next season, but our next season is already closed. And I realized that you would have never known when you submitted to us for the prior season what your experience would be like to encourage you for the next season. So there's really no way that we're ever going to get like a repeating author usually, unless we're already familiar with them.
Well, at least not like sequentially, but it could happen. Like you get one.
That's what I was saying. Yeah. So hopefully, this was season 4. We already closed submissions for 5. Hopefully you might give us something for season 6. It'd be great to have you back on the show, both writing a story as well as talking with you.
Yeah, be great.
And as usual, the biggest thank you goes out to our fans and followers who listen daily and spread the good word of Bob. May you languish, lament, and loathe, but always with love. #stay gray. Take care and enjoy your evening, Hailey.
Thank you so much. You enjoy yours too.
Thank you, I will. And good night, folks. Bye.
Join us each week after every episode for another edition of Behind the Door.